good morning, or whatever time it is for whomever is listening to this. Welcome to Tarot and Attachment. My name is Erin Smith. I am here to track themes that are emerging in the collective through the use of tarot imagery. This is the Sunday following the election in the United States. So there is a lot of emotion, fear of what changes might be awaiting us in the next months to years. I'm not going to be looking that far afield, but I am interested to see what insider guidance Spirit might have for us in regards to how we can best navigate the world as it is, conditions as they are, and what will be most helpful for us to know, understand, or do in regards to this time that we find ourselves in. So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to concentrate while I shuffle, and then we will consult the cards. So I'll be with you momentarily. I'm just going to say a prayer over these cards. Man, interesting. Wow. Wow. I mean, similar themes that have been coming up in previous readings. Again, a really strong emphasis here on tapping into the divine feminine in whatever way that manifests for us in the world. That this, and I was actually thinking about this morning on my morning hike. In fact, I thought that I might speak on this today just because I know that so many people are feeling unsettled in regards to just the society that we live in, the expressions of distress. And I mean, like, let's face it, if you've been spending any time online, which is not a hospitable place these days, there are all kinds of overt expressions of cruelty and misogyny. And what I was thinking about, what I have been thinking about, is that since the election, my morning ritual is to take my dog on a walk in in the neighborhood, and everyone that I see, everyone that I come across on my path, I smile warmly, I look them in the eye, and I wish them well. Either good morning or good day, depending on what time I'm going on my walk. And so many people do the same thing. It's this beautiful ritual that I actually quite look forward to in the mornings. This exchange of kindness and recognition, simply because we are neighbors, simply because we're occupying the same space at the same time. And it's lovely. These are broad populations of people. I happen to live in a neighborhood that is multicultural, and all are represented, every different ethnicity, every different age range, gender identification, sexual orientation. There's a pretty strong diversity within my neighborhood, and there's this warm exchange that happens every morning. It's been happening. I've been doing this ritual, engaging in this ritual for years. And I am happy to report that even after the election, nothing has changed. We continue to engage in this ritual with one another. And it does seem to me, since we're on the other side of this election, that it is never more important than now for us to stay connected to our own humanity and extend that invitation to engage with kindness and compassion to those of us who we occupy the same space with, literal and figurative. And tarot, it seems, is associating that with a kind of feminine energy. And so I also really want to talk about that because, especially in light of the issues that have come up around this election cycle, it is easy to get lost in the literal in terms of what it means to be a man or a woman, to be an expression of masculinity or femininity. And so I want to talk about this in terms of the way these ideas or these principles were looked at in terms of like Hermeticism, because ultimately those are the underlying philosophical principles that have been embedded in the tarot, at least according to many scholars who have studied the evolution of the tarot since its origins. So this idea of masculine and feminine energy is not meant necessarily to be taken in a completely literal sense. This is not about women are this way and men are this way. These are symbolic representations. This is a metaphorical language that takes place in imagery. So according to Hermetic principles, which I think are somewhat related to Taoist principles. The feminine, or yin, yin being sort of the equal and opposite expression of yang, is associated with the feminine. And so let's talk about the archetypal representation of the feminine. It is internal. It is often described as being passive. And this is simply to say that there is a kind of reflective quality. There's a kind of nurturing, when you are, and okay, so then again, let's look at this. It could be literal and metaphorical. Let's look at what a mother does when she is creating new life in the womb. She is nourishing and nurturing that life, creating an environment which is dark. It is a dark environment. It is an internal environment. And it is like a cocoon. A womb is like a cocoon. It's like the void, that there is something within that dark space that allows life to form. And again, if we're gonna, let's think about this metaphorically. We, if we are invoking this quality of the feminine, instead of going off half-cocked and taking actions based on fear or anger or whatever, if we're being overly reactionary and exerting ourselves before we've had time to reflect, to be still, to sit within ourselves, to cultivate a sense of presence to what is, especially, by the way, when it's emotionally overwhelming. That building affect tolerance, I think, is part of this energetic that's being expressed through Queen energy and through the Empress. I mean, just like, again, these cards continue to come up over and over again when I'm pulling them over the last couple of weeks. It is this strong mothering, like the divine mother. Again, even the earth herself can be an expression of this mothering energy, this nurturance, especially when we're looking at it in terms of the earth. The earth is in tune with symbiosis. So it's systemic thinking, rather than the individualism that rushes in to claim its prize. It is thinking about the interconnectivity of things. Again, going back to the metaphor of the mother is whatever she is doing, whatever she's taking in, it is affecting this life inside of her. So there is no distinction between inside and outside. They are connected. There's an interconnectedness. And this understanding, this realization, this being very, again, this, in order for us to be reflective and to be discerning and to hold space for something, even an idea to form. Again, it's like, let's look at these things as ideas of what kind of society we might like to give birth to that might be an alternative to the one that we find ourselves in now, rather than going off half-cocked. we have to take some time to be reflective about the interconnectivity of all who are involved in creating society. And how can we go about doing that, giving an eye to symbiosis? How can all be nurtured? Because this is the thing, when you're looking at systems of interconnectivity, as you know, we know nature is, whenever you're being exploitative or extractive, you are not set apart from that. You know, of course, this is the absurdity of destroying the planet. You know, the people who are extracting resources indiscriminately and causing great harm to the ecosystem are essentially tearing the house down while they're still inside of it. You know, all the money in the world is not going to shield you from a dying planet. So again, there's this kind of sense of like, we are being called to give birth to something new. It is being expressed through these archetypes of the divine feminine, the archetypal mother. These two are especially very similar, and it comes through love and compassion, through being heart-centered. That is what cups relate to. Cups are about emotions, being connected to our emotions. It's not enough to conceive it with the mind. We have to feel it. That and consequently, if we're feeling into what the best possible outcome might be for ourselves and others, it also there's a requirement there to be empathetic, to imagine how others are feeling, and to connect with that within ourselves. And again, it's this idea of like, how can I hold space for those around me to grieve, to express their emotions? How can I meet those emotions with recognition? You know, when I'm seeing people in distress, can I feel into that and therefore offer up some kind of joining? How can I join people in what they're feeling and what they're going through, in order, just if for no other reason than just to allow others to know that they're not alone, and you know, myself included. I feel better knowing that there are other people out there who are struggling right now, who are struggling with this decision and what it means. And at this stage, like, us simply being in a position of connecting is like going to be ultimately very helpful. I think it's interesting that there's a lot of pentacle energy coming up here. This guy made me laugh because, again, he keeps coming up. I believe that he's come up in sort of the last 3 pulls that I've done as of late. And what I'm starting to see in terms of the pattern, the association with this 4 of Pentacles, is this need of the aristocracy. And I did want to make this clarification. I know that in my last reading, the day after the election, I was sort of, I made some reference to the moneyed class, and I want to be pretty clear about this. I really am referring to a very minute demographic in society. The people who can afford to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to affect the outcome of an election and raise their stock, you know, dividends overnight. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about in fact, I'm going to be clear about this, and it's been said by, you know, wiser people than myself, that ultimately, unless you are a person who can contribute hundreds of millions of dollars to a campaign, we're more alike than not. So this is not a vilification of a certain class, but it is an acknowledgement that there are people who are hoarding resources at the top. And this is, again, irrefutable, that because of allowing the kind of money that we've allowed to enter into politics based on Citizens United, that there is an unlimited supply of money, it essentially nullifies an individual's ability to vote based on what they need. What we're looking at here is corruption, is people who are in positions of power, like this king, who are controlling the wealth, the resources. And remember, ultimately, the harm that we do others will eventually be their downfall. It's a Machiavellian principle. It's been shown throughout history that a dynasty is born out of the corruption of the old regime, and they rise to power with the will of the people, and slowly the degeneration into corruption happens within that political system until there is a revolt, a revolution, and a subsequent overthrow, and then the whole process starts again. And so what we're looking at here is, again, it's like whenever there's a power imbalance, whenever there is a strong surge of one energy, then we need to bring in the equal and opposite energy. And again, I think that's why these cards keep coming up of the divine feminine. We've just been in a period of extraction, of conquering, of dominance over nature, over resources. There has been this kind of hoarding of money and power amongst a very select few, and we're out of balance. We're at a tipping point where nature and social structures are trying to right themselves. And in order to do that, the equal and opposite energy has to come in. Instead of extraction, we need to nurture. And remember that this is also not a vilification of the masculine, because in Hermetic terms, masculine is assertive. It takes action. It's associated with the will. There is a sense of doing, and this is not bad energy. You need this energy. We all do in our lives. We can't remain inactive forever. But the objective, if I'm going to be healthy within my individual body and mind, and I'm going to live within a healthy society of others, striving for balance is wise. It's very much the principle of certain, it's like in Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, then those systems are really looking to imbalance as the origin of sickness. And medicine is all about bringing a person back into a state of homeostasis. And this is what is needed in society now. So this idea of hoarding, of contracting, of controlling the money or the resources stands in stark contrast with this kind of energy of generosity. So this one is interesting. Let's look at this one. Okay, so the way that I usually describe the Seven of Pentacles goes like this. You have the soul of a poet, but you think to yourself, nobody makes a living being a poet. I am going to be a banker instead. It's a kind of energy of, so we make these decisions to disown the more soulful parts of ourselves when we believe the lie that that can't sustain our well-being. You know, it's kind of like, in some ways, what's been going on in the world since the 80s. I think I referenced this in my post-election reading. But slowly but surely, we've been taking money out of the arts. You know, there was a time in this country where we had social programs that funded the arts because we saw them as an essential. The arts keep the soul of society. It's an essential part of bringing people together and helping them find meaning. And you know, ritual is related to the arts. This sensation of connecting my insides to the outside and sharing that with other people, allowing other people to share in my internal expression. The arts are incredibly valuable. And yet, over the decades, we have dismissed them and denigrated them. And, you know, out of fear of financial insecurity, children have turned away from the arts and gone into fields that they felt would be more financially lucrative. And again, I'm not suggesting that if you're called to become an investment banker or you're called to become a computer coder, great. That if that is a true expression of your soul, then by all means one should do that. But why then is there no room for other forms of creative expression? And why would we denigrate them and not reward people who are going into fields that are more artistically linked? And we just don't do it. It's like, you know, that we've all internalized this message around the starving artist. You know, the artist feels into these bigger psychological, sociological movements and expresses them in forms that are, you know, the arts are amazing because it speaks directly to the unconscious. You know, when everything isn't so literal, when you're able to use symbolic representations to express ideas or movements, it's powerful. And ultimately, what the Seven of Pentacles is pointing to is that we've sold our souls to a false promise of security. That's really what's being expressed in the Seven of Pentacles, that we have bought this idea that in order to find safety and security, we have to align ourselves with empty promises of prosperity that are not in alignment with our true values. And the Seven of Pentacles is saying that will be like the fruit rotting on the vine. It's not going to work out. the only way for us to create true prosperity for ourselves in life is to authentically express who we are on a deeper soul level. So selling ourselves out to the highest bidder is not going to, again, the energy here is like, you're not invited to the club anyway. So why are you aligning with this false promise of you will be taken care of financially so long as you abandon those parts of your humanity that make life meaningful? It's a false promise. That's really what the Seven of Pentacles is saying, and it's asking us to reevaluate in that regard and realign with what feels more right. So that also means that we have to start speaking the truth to ourselves and to others, and not being afraid to ruffle the feathers of those outside of ourselves. The Seven of Swords is what I associate with people pleasing, trying to figure out what other people want to hear and then expressing that message. There's something slightly disingenuous about the Seven of Swords, like you're trying to get away with something and you're doing it with this sort of like conniving assessment. How can I get what I want here by saying something or communicating something, again, that isn't entirely in alignment with who I am and and what kind of world I want to live in? There's this sense of like, I've been thinking a lot about this too. We just live in a world now where it's hard to discern the true from the false. That there is an agenda that certain people have that are being put forth through these different venues of communication, online, social media, YouTube, this platform. And it's great. You can definitely find people who are creating a message that is heartfelt. But you can also find a lot of people who are co-opting these platforms to put forth messages that serve their agenda, in the form of propaganda, in the form of so half the time I'm like, I don't even know what's true necessarily. Are the comments in some section that are getting people that are attacking people and riling people up, is that even a real person or is that a bot? What is the message and who benefits from it is definitely something that goes through my mind. Going back to education and the money that's being taken out of education and how it's being spent. Typically in most public schools, we're not teaching kids critical thinking skills, which is really we're seeing how detrimental that can be now. Because if you can't apply even just some level of questioning, to a message that is being loudly, you're being beaten over the head with some loud message. It is really beneficial, I think, to just take a moment and consider who might benefit from that message. I always like to say, follow the money. I just think that what Spirit is asking us to do is keep all this in mind, but trust that we can continue to foster love, generosity, compassion, nurturance, that we can allow that to be our guiding light on this path as we move forward. We're kind of, we're at the beginning of something. The Two of Wands is the beginning stages of a process. And it's important for us to be where our feet are at and not get too far in the future, right? It's really easy right now to project worst case scenarios and to become so fearful that we're immobilized. So, to some degree, it's important to recognize that we don't exactly know how this is all going to play out from where we stand now. But if we are cultivating a sense of present tense awareness, and we're taking measured steps, we're taking the next right indicated step along this path, hopefully, again, if we're allowing ourselves to be led by this energy of connectivity and symbiosis, then hopefully this path will unfold in a good way and lead us to whatever this transformation is that's being pointed to. Judgment is rebirth. This is a transformative time in life. It's, I know that I'm sure my good friend Allie, who has an astrological forecast that she does on a weekly basis that I follow because her wisdom is really necessary and insightful. We're coming into a time where Pluto is changing signs. And, it's moving out of the sign of Capricorn and moving into Aquarius. Pluto is the planetary archetypal expression of death and rebirth. It's very much the energy of judgment that in order to give birth to something new, typically old structures must die. And it's often, messy, because again, when you're in power, you don't want to let go of it. You're holding on to it for dear life. And so typically there's a kind of intense energy that builds before those structures will fall. And it's hard to know what that's going to look like. And I pray for myself and for all of us that we can find our way through this, and be okay. Certainly, throughout the ages, human beings have gone through periods of intensely destructive forces and have come out the other side. But I know full well that there are some people who fare better than others. And so I'm going to continue to hold on to this idea that as things are shifting and as we're moving into a new state, that the one thing I'm pretty certain of is that there's safety in numbers. And empathy and compassion and kindness and generosity will help to foster communities of support that will make it easier to transit this time. I think it's interesting that certain cards keep coming up. All right, I talked for a long time. I appreciate your attention. I hope some of this was helpful, and let's keep going. Many blessings. Take care.